Have you ever cried out to God in silence, only to be met with nothing but the ticking of the clock? Have you ever asked for a sign, not out of curiosity, but out of desperation? And then, something strange happens. A number appears. Ordinary at first, even meaningless. But then it comes again, and again. She didn't expect anything that morning. Just another restless night behind her, and another day ahead with more questions than answers. The clock read 2:22. She blinked once, twice, and moved on. But it followed her. On the receipt at the grocery store. On a street sign she passed. In the corner of a video she wasn't even paying attention to. 222. Always the same. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't magical. It was quiet, like a breath that lingers, asking to be noticed. And she did notice. Not just the number, but the space it opened within her. A question stirred, gentle yet insistent. Is this you? Psychologists say the human brain seeks patterns to find meaning, especially in moments of stress, grief, or transition. But there's more to it. Some patterns don't just reflect the mind, they awaken the soul. She wasn't just looking for a coincidence. She was longing for connection, for assurance, for a whisper in the dark that says, "You are seen." That night, she opened her Bible at random, more from instinct than ritual. Her eyes fell on Revelation 3:20. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in." Her heart slowed. The number, was it a knock? She began to remember. Not just her recent struggles, but the many times she had felt forgotten, prayers that seemed unanswered, loneliness that clung like fog. And now, this, something small, a sign, a symbol, a message even. There was no thunder, no angel appearing in the kitchen, just a number. And yet, it began to shift something in her. The number didn't explain her pain. It didn't solve her life. But it pierced the numbness. It gave her a moment of pause, a sacred pause. Perhaps that's how God works. Not always through miracles that shake the earth, but through subtle signs that stir the heart. She didn't know yet what 222 meant, but she knew it meant something. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. It began to change the way she looked at everything. The number wasn't just on her clock anymore. It seemed to weave itself into the quiet corners of her day. On the receipt from her coffee, there it was again, 2.22. On a license plate in traffic, on the side of a passing bus, on a page number of the book she was reading. Each time it appeared, she didn't feel surprise. She felt stillness, a stillness that seemed to say, "Pay attention." She no longer questioned whether it was real. She questioned what it meant. And somewhere deep in her she began to feel that the number wasn't the answer. It was the invitation. An invitation not to understand, but to follow. Not with her feet, but with her attention, her awareness, her spirit. Symbols have always been part of how God speaks. In Scripture, they echo everywhere. A rainbow after the flood, a burning bush in the desert, a star above Bethlehem. The numbers 3, 7, and 40, all rich with meaning, each a door to something divine. But symbols do not shout. They do not demand. They wait. They ask you to listen with more than your ears. And she began to do just that. One evening, after seeing the number again during a walk, she stopped beneath a tree and looked up. The branches tangled above her in soft silhouette. She remembered how, in the Psalms, David wrote, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Maybe the sky was always speaking. Maybe everything was. Maybe the number, like the stars, was not there to convince, but to remind. As a student of faith, and now of her own soul, she began to see that God had not stopped speaking. Only her listening had gone quiet. Life had rushed in, loud and demanding. Loss, disappointment, the dull ache of waiting too long for things that never came. But now, this simple number was breaking through that noise like light through a narrow window. From a psychological view, this shift is subtle but powerful. A person moves from passive observation to active awareness. They begin to participate in meaning-making, to let their soul assign purpose, where before there was only confusion. And when they do that, not from delusion but from devotion, they begin to heal. Because healing doesn't come only from answers. It comes from connection. She started to keep a small notebook, not to track the number, but to record how she felt when she saw it. And slowly, she noticed a pattern, not in the number, but in herself. Each time it appeared, her breath deepened, her chest loosened. Her thoughts, so often tangled, grew quiet for just a moment. It was not fear she felt or wonder. It was peace, the kind that does not demand anything in return. The number had become a symbol, but more than that, it had become a sacred rhythm, a gentle, invisible hand pressing against the door of her heart, reminding her that she was not forgotten, that maybe, just maybe, she was being called. But for what? That question lingered, not as a burden, but as a seed. She didn't rush to answer it. She let it stay there in the quiet, because something inside her understood. Not all symbols are puzzles to be solved. Some are presence. Some are love. The number had settled into her life like an old friend, never loud, never demanding, just there, quiet, present. And yet, one morning, as the light poured through her window and danced across her floor, she realized she could no longer stay in the silence it offered. She needed to ask what it meant, not in theory, but in the reality of her own life. If this was a message, if it was indeed God knocking gently on her spirit, then what was she being called to do? She didn't expect the answer to come all at once. She didn't hear a voice or receive a vision. But what she felt as she sat with that question was a strange kind of permission. Not instruction, not command, but permission to begin again. To believe that life was not finished with her. That something was waiting, not far away, not in some distant season, but here. Now, she wrote in her journal that day, "If this number is from you, then I will listen. Even if I don't understand, even if all I hear is silence, I will still listen." There was something sacred in that surrender. From a psychological perspective, what she experienced was a gentle internal shift, a movement from passive noticing to active trust. When people begin to believe they are in a relationship with something greater than themselves, they change. Their posture toward life softens. They begin to hope again, not because they've been given all the answers, but because they finally stop needing them. That was the change in her. She began to reflect on the patterns of her life, on the ways she'd pulled back from others, on the dreams she'd folded away, thinking they no longer mattered. She asked herself questions she had once buried beneath busyness and fear. What am I still carrying that God never asked me to hold? What have I stopped believing because it took too long to arrive? Where have I mistaken delay for abandonment? Each time she saw the number, she let it ask those questions of her again, not as accusations, but as gentle invitations. She began to see 222, not just as a symbol of God's presence, but as a call to alignment, a reminder to bring her inner life into harmony with the peace she longed for. And peace, she realized, wasn't something that fell from the sky. It was something you chose, moment by moment. It was the choice to believe that God was still writing, even in the chapters you didn't understand. It was the choice to believe that your pain had not been wasted, your silence had not gone unheard, and your waiting was not empty. One night, after a long conversation with a friend about unanswered prayers, she walked home in the dark. The street was empty, the wind soft. She looked up at a building she had passed 100 times, and there it was again. Apartment 222. A simple plaque beside a door. But this time, something opened in her. She smiled. Not because she had figured it all out, but because she no longer needed to. The number had become more than a sign. It had become a mirror. In it, she saw her longing, her hope, her fear, and her faith, all woven together like threads of a single cloth. It wasn't about the number anymore. It was about what the number awakened in her, a willingness to hope, a choice to keep walking, even when she didn't know the way. And perhaps, most importantly, a quiet, daily yes to the possibility that God was speaking. Still, morning came slowly, the way it does when the soul is already awake, before the body stirs. She sat at the edge of her bed, not reaching for her phone, not rushing into the day, just listening. Not for the number anymore, but for what it had called forth in her. A shift had taken place. Subtle, yes, but real. It was no longer enough to notice. Now she felt a quiet need to respond. But how does one respond to something so invisible, so personal, so sacred? She thought about the people she had not forgiven, the words she had meant to say but never found, the prayers she had once whispered in the dark but had let fall silent, thinking perhaps no one was listening. The number hadn't solved her questions, but it had led her back to them. And more than that, it had led her to realize she could walk through them, gently, honestly, faithfully. She began small. A message to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. A note of encouragement slipped anonymously under a neighbor's door. A whispered prayer before stepping into work, not asking for anything, just offering her presence. These weren't dramatic acts. They didn't make headlines, but they were holy. Each one a response to that sacred whisper that had begun with a number and had become a way of living. When the heart believes it is being led, the body follows. Slowly, she began to structure her days not around obligations, but around quiet obedience. If she felt prompted to pause, she paused. If she sensed a need to speak kindness, she spoke. And if the number appeared again, as it often did, she smiled, not because she needed reassurance, but because she was learning to walk without it. From a healing perspective, this is the turn, the moment where awareness becomes embodiment, where the soul, having recognized its ache, begins to move with intention. Trauma often freezes us. Faith frees us. Faith doesn't remove the mystery. It simply makes room for us to live inside it without fear. One evening, she returned home from a long day, her mind full of half-finished thoughts. She reached into her mailbox and pulled out a package she hadn't expected. Inside, a book. No note, no sender. Just a slip of paper tucked between the pages with a single verse. The steps of a good person are ordered by the Lord, and He delights in their way. Psalm 37, verse 23. She stood still in the hallway, the hum of the building rising around her like low music. It was not the number this time. It was something deeper, something that said, You are not wandering. You are being led. She no longer needed to decode every moment. Not every appearance of 222 had to mean something, because what mattered was no longer the number, but the new path it had opened in her, a path where she walked not by sight, but by trust, where peace was not the absence of trouble, but the presence of God in the middle of it. This, she realized, was the true meaning. The sign had never been about answers. It had been about relationship. And relationships are not puzzles to be solved. They are journeys to be lived. She had responded, not perfectly, not without fear, but fully. And now she was learning that in the kingdom of God, a small response, offered with sincerity, can move mountains. Even a whisper can echo in eternity.